Funding for the Hinckley Report is made possible in part by the George S. and Dolores Doré Eccles Foundation and the Cleone Peterson Eccles Endowment Fund.
Tonight on the Hinckley Report, anticipation builds as Utah Republicans gather at their annual convention. What important issues does the party face? Will conservatives or moderates win out on important policies? And which leaders are stepping up to determine the future of their party? Utah's congressional leaders weigh in on major developments in national politics. What issues are important to Utah voters? How could they affect our state? And as temperatures rise, what will be the major stories of the summer?
Good evening and welcome to the Hinckley Report. I'm Jason Perry, director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics. Covering the week, we have Boyd Matheson, opinion editor with the Deseret News, Natalie Gochnour, director of the Kem C Gardner Policy Institute, and Max Roth, anchor with Fox 13 News. Thank you all for being with us today, and what's maybe the last episode of the Hinckley Report for the summer, which is why we're going to talk about some things that are happening now and through the rest of the summer. Boyd, we're going to start with you, though. What's happening tomorrow? The Republicans are gathering together in the state for their convention. Give us a preview.
It's sort of going to be the Avengers Endgame version of the Republican Party. I think this really is their chance to get it right. You hear some echoes of maybe this is a chance to unite around some principles and policy, as opposed to all the internal squabbles and battles that have been going on. And I think that's an important thing for the Republicans. The same thing holds true for the Democrats, in that neither party has really given young people in particular a reason to be a member of their party. And so I think this is really a seminal moment for the Republicans first and the Democrats in June. Will they get to a message that people can rally around? Political parties are losing traction. They're losing a lot of funding. And will they be relevant with the number of independents or independent-minded Utahns moving forward?
Mm-hmm. Natalie, I'm curious about that, because even candidates in the Republican Party for our local offices have said this last go-around, we didn't get a ton of help from the Republican Party. In fact, some of them were just kind of complaining about that too. Are they becoming less relevant, Democrats and Republicans both, because both are having financial problems and other issues internally?
For me, the backdrop for the convention is that they almost didn't have the money to put it on. Governor Herbert had to, make a contribution to help it happen. It all comes down to an internal squabble about access to the ballot. I think most of our viewers will know that it used to be you could only get on the ballot through the caucus convention system. Mm-hmm. Now we have a signature process that has ripped the Republican Party apart. There's been a bit of what my former boss, Mike Levitt, called a civil war going on. Mm-hmm. And I think Boyd's saying that it seems to be calming a little bit as that process has withstood legal challenge, and there hopefully is a movement in the Republican Party to come back together.
Mm-hmm. There's probably a certain amount, though, I think, of folks who are watching right now who are intensely interested in what happens at these conventions. The vast majority of Utahns are not. And so, the question as to what is going to, are they going to find a message that inspires Utahns? It would be a first if they do, because these conventions are about the party grassroots, and these squabbles are all such internal politics that really, I think the vast majority of Utahns think is irrelevant.
So Max, it's interesting. So if they spend a lot of time tomorrow about this Count My Vote initiative, mm-hmm. the right to get signatures, is that a signal for where the party is, or this is where they are, not necessarily Republicans in the state?
Well, it's whether you define the party as this organization, this nonprofit group that gathers each year to make these decisions, or if you define the party as the people in Utah who call themselves Republicans or Democrats. Because if it's the latter, then those issues are not particularly of interest, and I think that is not where the party is largely.
I'd like to say that I define being a Republican as someone who believes in limited government and free markets and a market economy and the like, and I don't define it by access to the ballot.
Mm-hmm. And I think Max brings up a great point, too. The vast majority of Utahns are going to be mowing their lawns, out at soccer games, doing the shopping over the weekend. But the interesting thing is, again, can these political parties get to something that actually matters to regular Utahns? And, you have these long platform battles. These conventions go on all day. say. I'm one of those who believes they should really move back to more of a Abraham Lincoln style one-page document in terms of a lot of principles and a few policies. And I think that would be much more relevant, because it gets so complicated that a lot of Utahns are like, you know what, I got to get to soccer game. I'm not engaging today.
It's true. I've been to several of these on both sides of the aisle, of course, and it takes a lot of time. So I guess the question is, Boyd, since you brought it up right there, what issues would they discuss that people in Utah do care about that maybe makes the party relevant again?
Yeah, I think they need to go back to what Natalie was saying in terms of limited government, the tax policy, which I know we'll get to is going to be really relevant to every Utah in terms of how that really happens. So I think there are some things that Utah is doing incredibly well. We get a lot of recognition around the country because we have a great free market economy. We have strong institutions of civil society. I think it's reminding Utahns that we're this great laboratory of democracy, and it's working.
Although the issues that they get to that may be the most relevant to voters, the way they get to those issues could be the most alienating to voters. And the case in point is they're going to be discussing hate crimes legislation. And the proposition that they're trying to pass at the convention is saying that they want to get rid of the hate crimes law that just passed because it is punishing people for what they believe. Now, the majority of Utahns were in support of that hate crimes legislation. I believe the majority of Republicans writ large in the state were in support of that hate crimes bill. And so the party could be hurting themselves by discussing something that people care about.
Yeah. Very good. Now, just one last piece about this, though. To the extent that there's some mending on the Republican side, it depends on who the new chair is.
You know, that is the thing to watch for. So they have a current chair that's been embattled and for reasons we all understand isn't seeking the chairmanship again. And so we've got a lot of candidates there. And depending on who they pick, you'll have a sense of the mood of the party. And there is one candidate that represents, for me, the mainstream middle. And if he's selected, that'll be a good sign to someone like me.
So it's interesting to see some of our elected officials to show how it does matter. Boyd, we saw the governor weigh in and Senator Mike Lee both weigh in on a candidate, Derek Brown.
Yeah, and I think the message there was, I think from Senator Lee, you had he kind of goes the Boston to Philadelphia, right? We have to be ready for the Boston battles, protest what we don't want, but we have to have this Philadelphia vision of what we do want, which is, I think, what the governor's talking about as well. Derek is definitely he's good on the Boston battles, but he's a Philadelphia vision kind of guy. I think that will bring in donors, that would bring in a broader base in terms of the party as a whole.
Interesting. Max, let's talk about what's happened this week with the U.S. Attorney General, with William Barr. All right, so he testifies before the Senate Judiciary, didn't show up for the House. Give us a flavor for that, why that's the case, and what happened there, because you almost can't make this stuff up.
Well, it is, oh man, how to summarize. Depending on your perspective, his testimony to the Senate was either atrocious from the Democratic perspective, and really a strong belief that he, from that perspective, that he lied to Congress, and that he doubled down on that lie when talking to the Senate Judiciary Committee. And that was in particular about when he first characterized the Mueller report and then was questioned about it. He said he was questioned about a newspaper article that said that Robert Mueller was upset at how he had characterized the report, and he told Congress later that he didn't know why Mueller was upset or what that article was about. He said he wasn't aware of what that article was about. He had already received a letter from Robert Mueller 2 weeks prior that outlined exactly what Mueller was upset about. And so I see that as a pretty serious allegation, and something that's hard to get around, that he was intentionally misleading. Although the Republican perspective on that committee, they were coming from the point of view, including Senator Lee, that the real issue was overstepping by the investigators.
You saw me shake my head, Jason. I just shook my head because it has this feeling of button, who's got the button? You know, games being played, not a lot of honesty, transparency, and I think it's really offensive to the American public. And I think if you said you can't, what did you say? You can't write about these things or something? You can't make this stuff up? You know, we're in a novel here, and it's a 20-chapter novel, and we're on like chapter 7. There is so much more to come on this. We're going to see Mueller, I think, testify. Would you guys agree with that?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
You're going to see some subpoenas issued, and while I don't think we'll get to impeachment proceedings, that's just my guess, because I think Nancy Pelosi is standing her ground and going to prevail on that. But you're going to continue to see this sort of drama unfold.
Yeah, and I think really interesting to Natalie's point, it's Congress already has a 9% approval rating from American voters, American citizens, and I think it's about to go down because of what's being done there. You saw the games being played on Thursday. You had members of the House when Mr. Barr, the AG, did not show up. They had a toy chicken and a bucket of chicken in a committee room in the People's House, which totally undermines the trust the American people have in the process, because you had members of Congress jockeying with reporters to take selfies of a bucket of chicken, on a witness table, and the very reason they were having that discussion was over the fact that the committee wanted to have staff be able to question the Attorney General, not members of Congress. And why would that be? Because Nancy Pelosi knew that all those members of Congress were looking for their YouTube moment, their social media moment, their fundraising moment. And she didn't trust them to ask real questions of the Attorney General to get to the underlying truth.
Well, let me take a little issue with that, because what you're saying is that the embarrassing side of all this, and the thing that people will be fed up about, is the behavior of Congress. And you're right, there's something kind of undignified about the way that they went about that. At the same time, we have the Article 2 branch, the president, the administration, saying they're not going to pay attention to congressional subpoenas. They're going to deny them, saying Article 1, we don't recognize your authority. And that is a constitutional issue. And there's some really distressing readings of the Constitution coming out of the White House. And that is, to me, a far more significant issue than whether someone parades out a bucket of chicken or not.
And I actually completely agree with Max on this, because it's both sides that are causing the problem. And I think the Democrats played into the executive branch's hands, because now the president is going to say, see, they weren't really serious about investigating. They just wanted shenanigans and obstruction and investigations. And I think that undermines the trust in the executive branch. And so I think it's both sides of the table are not handling this the way the American people should expect and demand.
Natalie, how does that cut with these great points that you've all made here? I mean, how does this cut on both sides? If there is, let's just take that as a point that maybe there is an underlying decrease in confidence, but who does that help? Is it going to help Donald Trump for the next election, or is it going to help some of the Democrats?
I think it helps state and local governments, because I think in this country you're going to see increasingly problem solving come from local government interests, because it's very clear that our federal government is dysfunctional and not doing their job. And that can exist for a while. There'll come a time when it can't happen anymore, but this is where we're at.
Okay. Max, I want to show a quote from Senator Mike Lee for a moment that talked about this very point, and where he sees Congress and the president. He said this, and he's the most staunch supporter so far that we've seen in our delegation. The president has done more to restore liberty than any president in history. We should be grateful for that, and we should again point the finger back at Congress for the fact that Congress has relinquished power.
Okay, I'm flabbergasted by that, because I'm trying to see the internal logic, because Mike Lee is maybe the most vocal proponent of Article 1 power. He has, what does he call it, a caucus or an Article 1 initiative? It's one of his main points as a senator is to restore power to Congress. And now he's saying that a president who's saying, you know what, my reading of the Constitution is that Congress can only investigate things that have to do with legislation. That is an extraordinary statement that sounds to me like an anti-Constitution, anti-Article 1, anti-freedom statement, because the People's House has that authority in the Constitution to oversee the executive branch.
Go ahead, Boyd.
Yeah, no, the oversight thing to me is the most important part of all of that. And I think a lot of what you're seeing in Washington is the complete transactional nature of President Trump. He doesn't have relationships with anybody. Everything is a transaction. And so it's really ironic that on one day you'll have Senator Lee and Bernie Sanders standing together, giving a stinging rebuke to to the White House on their war powers. Again, what Max is talking about in terms of where does that authority lie? And then the next day, he's in the Oval Office with Van Jones and Cory Booker, signing criminal justice reform. And I think it shows, I think he's understood that. I think Mitt Romney has understood that look, the president is transactional, so you don't have to worry if you're with him on this one and you're not with him on the next one. It doesn't matter. Each thing's a transaction. So it's really created chaos. And again, I think it's undercutting the confidence the American people have in the institution. And sadly, I think we're also seeing that seep into our communities, that we trust each other less. And to me, that's the bigger worry, is that distrust.
Boyd, I'll double down on that and just say that, right now we're in the midst of one of our longest economic expansions in U.S. history. We're having all this dysfunction, but we're doing okay. But in a riptide moment, in a moment where there is an international or national emergency tragedy, distrusting these institutions, not treating them with proper respect and honor, it'll come to bite us. And so I think the clarion call is to expect more of our people in Washington.
Yeah, not less.
Natalie, you made a comment a moment ago about potentially having Mueller come testify. A lot of Democrats are saying that, but it's interesting that this week Mitt Romney kind of sided with several of them and said he would like to see that. Why do you think that's the case, and what good or bad could come of it?
I love watching what Senator Romney's doing, because he's really the only person, I think, back there right now. Boyd, you could add here, because you have worked in the Senate and whatnot, but he has a national stature. And when you're in those Senate office buildings, there's maybe one or two senators that everybody recognizes that walks in there, visitors, staff, and Senator Romney's one of them. So he has this stature and is able to, I think, say things and do things that others don't do. He's not vying for a spot on the Supreme Court. He's not vying, for some campaign
He's had his run
contribution. He's got a degree of freedom that others don't have, and I love watching him use his leadership to make things better.
Well, and you know what he did, which is, it's sad that it's so extraordinarily unusual, is that when the Mueller report came out, he said, he issued a very brief statement that said, I'm going to read the report and I'll tell you what I think. And then 2 days later, we get a comment, I read the report, this behavior is atrocious, and we have to take it seriously. Thank goodness that someone read that report. I felt like, as I was watching the Attorney General testify, that the Attorney General had not read the report, and the senators on the Judiciary Committee had not read the report, because they were asking questions back and forth that were answered clear as day in the report.
Yeah.
Okay, last comment on this.
I think it's really interesting, too, to play off of what both Natalie and Max have said, and that is, what are we looking for and what are we expecting out of our elected officials? I've always said the last question you should ask yourself before pulling the lever for someone in the voting booth is, what would this person do to make a difference if they lost? And I think you're seeing that kind of freedom from Senator Romney, that if he loses, he's got all kinds of things he can do and go make a difference. And we have far too many in Washington whose only vision is a vision of themselves in office. So every decision they make, every statement they make is calculated to either retain power or position them to gain more by running for another office. And that's something that comes back to we the people. We have to expect more of our leaders, which means we have to expect more of ourselves.
Very good. I appreciate that. I want to move on to what's happening this summer. I'm sad that we're taking a small break from the Hinckley Report, and as people are eagerly awaiting its return, I want to talk about what's going to happen in the next couple of months. Natalie, let's start with you. Big stories, big issues that you see. Some of them have started already, that you're going to see unfold this summer.
Well, two big political issues locally. You have a Salt Lake City mayor's race, which is always a big deal. It's an open seat. It's our capital city, and a lot of very worthy candidates. So that'll be fun to watch. And I also think you'll start to see one by one the gubernatorial candidates announce. Be interested to see what you two think on the timing. But I think between August and November, we'll see them all show their cards. So that's interesting. And then we have something called tax reform.
Oh boy.
So
boy, that's a pretty big swing. Small bite. Yeah. Natalie, thanks for that. Let's get through a couple of those. Let's talk about the governor's race a little bit. So Max, probably by fall, we're going to have a pretty good list.
We'll have some official candidates in the race. There are some where we think, oh, of course they're in. You have Spencer Cox, who we all think is going to be running. Some of the will they, won't they questions are people like Jason Chaffetz. Is he interested in coming back into politics, and if so, would it be in this race? What about, there was even talk about John Huntsman Jr. coming back to Utah and maybe wanting to take another run at governor. So it'll be fun to see what happens.
Put some more names out there: Greg Hughes, Thomas Wright, Amy Winder Newton. Who am I missing?
Growing. Might be the 21 the Democrats.
Any Democrat.
But it'll be a long list.
That's the big mystery. Nobody knows what will happen there.
Yeah.
Okay, so Natalie, what's happening with these races? I mean, this is so interesting that they're starting to time it the way they are based on who's jumping in and out.
I'll make a couple of predictions. I don't think that Chaffetz will do this, and I don't think Greg Miller, that's another name, I don't think Greg Miller will do this. I do think you'll see Spencer Cox. I think you'll see Greg Hughes. Interestingly, on the Spencer Cox, our lieutenant governor, I think it'll be a very tricky position for him to be in, to be lieutenant governor and a candidate for governor. When you're lieutenant governor, you have a loyalty and you basically own the vision and agenda of the CEO, Governor Herbert in this case, and I think it's very hard to claim your independence and still be the LG, and I would look for him to make a change there. That's just my prediction.
Herbert is historically popular. He does well, and he's the highest polling governor in the country at times.
If you want a mini-me, Governor Herbert, or a grand new vision from a new generation of leadership, I think they'd pick a new generation of leadership, and I think Spencer Cox will want to claim that.
And I think that is going to be the test for the governor's race, is who has a real vision. The test of any organization or society is, what do you do when you don't have to do anything? Utah's having great success right now, a lot of good things going on, but we know with that success comes growth, comes challenges, and it's not going to be good enough to say, hey, we're number one, we're doing okay, we're doing great. It's going to be about that big vision thing. That is going to be the issue, I think, rolling into 2020.
That's what Spencer Cox is going to have to do also, is paint that vision.
He's also been vocally opposed to President Trump. And what does that matter to the Utah Republican Party, and how much so?
Yeah.
Okay, let's tackle the small thing of tax reform that Natalie brought up. Okay, so Boyd stalled a bit during the legislative session, decided to punt, work on this until this summer. What are you hearing? Are we going to have a special session to discuss it?
Yeah, I hope there's a special session, because we do have to discuss it. As things continue to change and evolve, we've got to have a system that can sustain our success and our future growth. So if they punt it all the way to next session, I think that is a huge mistake. That would be a lack of leadership, in my view. Now, granted, this tax reform is the big bite and the long chew, to say the least. But I hope they're willing to take that bite. We know the Democrats are already out doing town halls, getting input, finding out how is this going to, if we're taxing services, how is that going to impact the poor and those at the lower end of the income bracket. There's a lot to cover there.
Okay. I know you're advising some of those folks in the legislature, Natalie.
Well, I would just say that it's a bit mysterious to some why we're talking about tax reform, tax modernization. We have budget surpluses right now. Our economy's strong. This is legislators looking around the corner. They're doing something very hard.
That's wild.
It is.
Planning ahead.
It's very unusual. And we have a situation where we have a structural problem. It's not a revenue problem right now. It's a structural problem. So sales tax is not keeping pace with the growth in our economy. In the short run, you can do that. But in the long run, all of a sudden, you can't educate your kids, you can't pay for your roads, you can't take care of public safety and the needs of society. So they're trying to fix it. And they did something really clever in the session. That is that they passed a structurally imbalanced budget. And this is to get people back to the table. So there's $300 million or so of one-time money going to ongoing. That brings people back, and then they also didn't do their big tax cut. Well, and if they hold a special session, they can give us a tax cut.
Now, here's the thing that I see as the big challenge the legislature is facing on this issue. Anyone who's spent time with the legislature knows there are a lot of lawyers, there are a lot of independent business people, there are a lot of people involved with insurance and financial issues and real estate. Those are the things, those are the services that are now a bigger part of our economy. Are they willing to vote against their self-interest in favor of the state economy?
Yeah. This is the classic problem, and just another way to think of it is that you have to broaden the base. Okay, the base is getting narrower and narrower as we move to services, which we don't tax, and we tax goods. It's getting narrower and narrower. But you can, if you broaden it, you can lower those rates, and that creates this magic of being more fair, more efficient, and I think they're going to find a way. There's a lot of things they can do. I don't think what they had in the session was the right answer, but I think they're coming up with some ideas that, let's say, spread the pain. How's that?
Boyd, how do they do
If you spread the pain and can keep a strong economy, then maybe you're getting somewhere.
I'm never going to argue with you on the fine points of economics, Natalie.
That's why Max is so smart.
There is politics here, but it is, they have a choice because they can do nothing, and that isn't in our state's long-term interest. And they can pass it on to others, but they may not act.
Okay. Are you of the same mind as Boyd? Then they will have a special session.
I think they will. There's, I give it a 70% chance, and I think the reason they'll do it is because they've come up with a better proposal that has had more, public review, and because they'll give a tax cut at the same time, which people want, and because they want a structurally balanced budget.
Boyd, let's talk about those two things. One is the tax cut idea. Was that a good way to pitch this as a tax cut when we're starting to talk about broadening, right? So, and while we're talking about that, how do you broaden it when so many people are saying, I'm all for broadening it, but not in my industry?
Not me. Yeah. And that's always the test. And as Max pointed out, you've got a lot of interest up there on Capitol Hill, and are they willing to look at all the people who are members of their association and say, guess what? We're going to have to bite the bullet on this one. So again, to me, this is the ultimate test of leadership. Again, doesn't have to, as Natalie pointed out, we're in surplus mode. We don't have to do this right now, but we have to do this right now from a leadership standpoint.
It's easier to do it when your economy's strong.
Yeah.
Easier to do it because you can both give a cut and phase in some things. And I think that viewers should remember that this is not just going to be a sales tax issue. There's a lot of things they can do.
Right.
They're talking about some property tax issues. They're talking about some motor fuel tax issues. So there's a way to very carefully, surgically do public finance in a way that maximizes benefits. And I think they're trying to find that special spot.
Okay, Max, are they finding it? Just a few seconds on the political implications then, because you got the finance side, but then you want to remain in office.
I don't know if they're finding it, but let me say people at home are worried because they had an increase on their when they did their taxes this year. Their tax returns from Utah they had to pay the state when they got a refund from the federal government. They do need to fix that too. I think a lot of people wrote a check this year.
Okay, and just one last piece. The governor's working with them on this. The governor's in line?
He better be.
Oh, I think it's been a huge priority for the governor's office.
All right, excellent. Thank you very much for your great insights today. Well, thank you for watching the Hinckley Report. This may be our last episode of the season, but we will be working all summer long. Please follow KUED on social media for additional content. I'm Jason Perry. We'll see you next fall. Thank you and good night.